Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and start. Welcome to College Day and the COVID-19 Essential Workers webinar. My name is Kayla Belgard and I'm a program manager at Silicon Valley Education Foundation. Before we get started, we'd like to know our audience a little bit more, so please take a moment to complete the poll that's going to pop up on your screen in just a second. I'll give you just a few minutes to complete that. Okay, we're about 50% of the way completed. Awesome, 100%. Thank you all so much. Now I'd like to introduce the panelists from Management Leadership of Tomorrow, and I'll hand it over to James Colton to get our introduction started.
Great. Thank you so much, Kayla. My name for all of you on the call right now, and for those of you who are watching the recording later, is James Colton. I'm Assistant or Associate Director of Recruitment Admissions at MLT. And so I'm one of my responsibilities is helping students get involved with MLT while they're in college, and then assisting them for later applications throughout the rest of their career. So I'll pass it to Tanya next.
Great, super excited to be here. Can everyone hear me just fine? Great. My name is Tanya Sanchez Bonilla. I am calling in from beautiful and cold, sunny Chicago. I work for CVS Health. I've been with the company for 2.5 years. I've been a longtime fan of MLT, and we can talk about this more throughout the conversation, but a wonderful organization that allowed me to prep when I wanted to go to graduate school for the business program. So met so many great people throughout that, but from business school, I pivoted into healthcare, which was a path I did not entirely was thinking about when I got out of college. So a long journey and a great experience through being engaged with MLT, going to business school, working into consulting, and today being here at CVS Health, doing a lot of great things to change the face of healthcare. But I'll share more later on. Thank you.
Thank you. And have Lorena next. You're on mute. Oh yeah, you're on mute right now.
Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, perfect. Hey everyone, my name is Lorena Santiago Hernandez, also calling in from sunny but cold Chicago. I have a long time standing with the MLT program. I was a CP alum when I was at Georgetown University, so I have a lot of love for MLT. Currently working for Procter Gamble as a senior account executive on the adult incontinence business. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Yes, Adriana.
Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here. My name is Adriana King, and I work for DaVita. I am actually based in Houston, so I'm a regional operations director, which means that I work in the field with our facility teammates. And our headquarters are in Denver, and I spent some time there as well. Really echo the sentiments that everyone mentioned. I have a very deep place in my heart from MLT as an MLT alum, but also lead some of the recruiting efforts for MLT at DaVita. So like I said, looking forward to deep diving with all of you and happy to be here.
Thanks. And last but not least, Elise.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can see and hear me. My name is Elise Douglas. I am based in Oakland. I'm calling in from my hometown of Philadelphia right now. And, you know, similar to everyone, long relationship with MLT. I joined after college as well for business school. and really appreciate the work and the network of the people involved in this organization, and really excited to share my various journeys to get to where I am today. And my background and career has been in real estate and business investing. And I'm a vice president at an organization, real estate developer in Oakland, that really focused on building new communities. And then I am also a founder and a general partner of a venture capital fund that focuses specifically on Black-owned businesses and how we look at the future of what our communities can and should be. So really excited to be here. I'm excited to speak with our panelists and share with you guys.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to do, we talked about kind of our love for MLT already. I'm going to do a quick overview of, this is the work MLT does, and this is the work where MLT has an impact. First, we work on economic mobility, so helping our fellows get high trajectory jobs after they graduate from college, or during or after business school. This in turn, we're creating a large leadership pipeline of diverse leaders in this country, which in turn then create diverse institutions. One of the traits, the superhero traits that we're going to highlight today is scrappiness. And so MLT defines scrappy as demonstrating an unwavering resolve to do whatever is necessary to achieve the best results for everyone involved, no matter how difficult. And I'm going to break this into a couple different pieces here. First, for unwavering resolve, it's not just perseverance or grit, but it's sort of welcoming challenges as we encounter them. With savviness, doing whatever is necessary, it's using all of our skills and knowledge to make good decisions. We are also very results driven at MLT. We pursue excellence, and we encourage all of our fellows to be really excellent at what they do. And then finally, as community, we believe in kind of lifting those up who are coming behind us, and making an impact in the communities that we come from. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and come back to kind of, let's get into backstories a little bit. So for each of the panelists, would love for you all to talk about, where'd you grow up, where'd you go to college, and talk us through a little bit about how did you make your initial college decision. So let's go kind of start in reverse order. So start with Elise.
Sure. And thank you. So like I mentioned, I'm originally from Philadelphia. I'm calling in from my parents' home right now. And I think what really inspired me from a young age, even if I couldn't articulate it very well, or if I didn't know where that would take me in life, I was really conscious of the neighborhood that I grew up in, the neighborhood my family grew up in. Cities like Philadelphia, similar to cities all across the country, where it matters where you lived in ways that are arbitrary and unnecessary. And so I was really inspired by that. And I wanted to, I think in my mind when I was a teenager, I thought of that as kind of the way those neighborhoods looked. I think that was my entire comprehension of that problem. And so I got really interested in architecture. And I was really fortunate to have an opportunity to go to Columbia in New York and study architecture. I think from a deciding process, I didn't really think that much about it. I didn't really think about the pathway it would take in my life. But in hindsight, I think when you're young, sort of that curiosity of there's a problem, there's a neighborhood, there's a community that I care about. Let me find a way to kind of serve that in my specific way, was something that really inspired me. And I felt like at Columbia, I would have an opportunity to do that. It was in a city, it was close to home, it wasn't too far away. And those are sort of the factors that inspired me to go there. I will say I did not have the best guidance counselors at the time. And if I hadn't gone and applied to Columbia myself, I would have never applied, because I definitely got the pressure all around me from my school and my guidance counselors that I was never going to get in. It wasn't worth my time, and I didn't do it. So one thing I always like to encourage people, and that's that happens a lot, especially to brown kids, people from, they're not the best, most elite background, were discouraged from applying and taking on those opportunities. And I got in. So without kind of the support of all those people who, were officially there to support me. And I always like to remind kids, one, make sure you apply. If you want to do it, at least, take the shot. You never know. But also there were tons of other people that came out of the woodwork to support me, who said, yes, this is great. I don't even know what Columbia is, but if you want to go, we support you. And so there's plenty of opportunity. And I always want people to know that even with the people that are supposed to be there and support you aren't doing it, there's a lot of people in your community that are there and are happy to do so if you ask.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you said reverse order, so I think I would be. Yeah, so I graduated from UCLA in 2009, a while ago. So for me, my family is from California. I'm born and raised in California. And similar to some of the stories that I hear when I do interviews with folks at MLT is, I really chose UCLA because it was what financially made sense for my family. I think that was the most practical piece of it. What I can say from a more of a personal or emotional feel, when I came out of high school, what I wanted to do wasn't necessarily very specific. I probably could have done it anywhere. I thought I would go to law school and ended up sort of pivoting completely away from that. But when I got to UCLA, it really just felt bigger than anything that I had imagined for myself. I was the first person in my family to go to college. And so for those of you who are on big sports, big volume campuses, if you get to a place like UCLA and you've never seen anything like that in your life, you're just like, this is obviously way bigger than me. But it also feels like I belong. So from a personal perspective, that is how I ended up going there. In terms of what I studied, I ended up studying dance and accounting, which we could get into if people have questions about that. But have a family that's in the arts and have a part of the family that's always been in business. And it's kind of just how I married that and ended up in healthcare, which is another interesting story. But I think just going back practically, financially made sense for my family. Personally, when I stepped on campus, it just felt like something that was way bigger than what I had expected, and decided that was a place that I wanted to grow.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone. So I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon, but it's so funny because all of my friends are like, where, like, that doesn't make sense because my family is a Mexican household. So I grew up in a very lively, loud, big Mexican family, and we were first gen. So both of my parents, they immigrated from Mexico back in the 80s, and their sole purpose and their sole desire in life was to make sure that me and my siblings had the opportunity to go to school. And so for me, it was always like, there was not an if I was going to college, it was when and where. But being so family oriented, I had looked up all of the schools in Oregon, and I ended up applying to like 8 different schools in Oregon. Didn't even think that there was that many. But I did have mentors, thankfully, and counselors who really looked out for me and encouraged me to say, hey, like, think bigger. Like, what's the worst that can happen? Kind of similar to what Elise said, and applying to some of the schools at our reach. And so I was handed an application to go to Georgetown. Initially, I had thought it was George Fox in Oregon. I was like, oh yeah, I'll apply. Like, I guess it wasn't on my list. But when it was actually a junior summer program. So when I applied to the program, I got in, and they're like, so you're going to Washington, D.C. And I was like, oh my God, I had no idea that it was on the other side of the country. And looking back at it, sounds really ignorant that I had no idea where Georgetown was. But I had 3 weeks of exposure to the university, and it was incredible to be in the city's capital. It was the first time really getting away from home and being away from my family. So it was really scary at first. And I definitely felt a bit of like an imposter doing the whole like traveling on the other side, going to a really prestigious university. But I didn't necessarily let that stop me. And my family was super encouraging to support me every step of the way. And so I went there in 2012, and I will say a little bit opposite to what Adriana said. I had a bit of a shock when I first got on campus. So for anyone who knows the Crystal Wright Network, it's a network of schools dedicated to Latino and young African-American students to be able to give them the opportunity to go to a private school, but still work at the same time. And so I was so used to having peers who kind of had a similar experience as me, grew up similar backgrounds as me. And so when I went to Georgetown, it was a bit of a shock from like an economic standpoint, and also just from like a diversity standpoint. It's very homogenous. And so there was a bit of like, okay, well, do I belong here? What am I doing here? This is so far from home. But really finding the people on campus and finding friends who look like me, others who didn't, who share similar experiences as me, and really building those communal bonds really made it feel like home to me eventually. So I graduated in 2016, and actually through MLT, I found my first job, which was working for Procter Gamble. And so I started my career with the company out in Boise, Idaho, which is very different for me, another kind of shot back to the West. And now I've been in Chicago for the last 3 years, and I love it.
Great, thank you.
Great, this is Tanya. I guess that I go back to the acronym that you shared, James, being scrappy. My story is slightly different. I am also a first generation college student. Who went to college for the first time here in the US. My family immigrated in the 1990s from Mexico, and I was brought along at the age of 10. So for me, given that my family had just arrived into the country, right, I was going to have to go 6 years later to college after arriving here. My journey was slightly different. I went to a great high school here in Chicago where, I had all the great support, and we were encouraged to, apply to our reach schools. And I did get into an Ivy League school, but I could not afford to go there. And hence I ended up staying and only attending the one of the schools that accepted me here locally. My family was well beyond their means, and even after we factor in all the financial help, that there was no way I could go to this Ivy League school. And at the time, this is one piece of advice comes in for you guys. I probably should have reached out and explored more and share a little bit more of my journey with those people and organizations like MLT that could probably have helped me, but at the time I did not, because you don't know what you don't know, right? But that nevertheless did not stop me from pursuing my goals and being able to achieve much thus far. I've been able to leverage the guidance of organizations like En-ROADS and MLT to land the right internship. So coming out of college, out of the local university where I went to, I ended up landing an internship in banking. Subsequently, I went to a great business school too, where I ended up landing a job in consulting, and I ended up hanging out with people who had gone to all these great Ivy League schools too. So I guess moral of the story, many paths can lead you to success. And while at times in our communities, right, we may have worked so hard and achieved where we want to go, sometimes circumstances do not allow for that. But nevertheless, don't let that deter you, because success can be achieved. And again, just be open to reaching out, connecting, learning from others, tapping into the resources that great organizations such as this and MLT and so many others are willing to extend to you on so many fronts. So anyways, that's a little bit about my story, and I'll share more as we continue.
Great. Well, thank you all. This is a COVID response panel, and I know many of us know people who are fighting COVID directly through the healthcare system as doctors, as nurses, as receptionists or EMTs or 911 dispatchers or other healthcare professionals. And so I do want to highlight that there's a session later today that California Community College is hosting that's going to talk about careers in healthcare. But now I want to get a little bit more into how different business professionals have incorporated some level of COVID response into their work, and obviously highlighting scrappiness and some of the other elements we talked about before. So I guess, and this is where we can kind of bounce around, but for each of the panelists, can you tell us a little bit about what your company does and what your role is there, in case attendees aren't familiar? And kind of open it up and we can popcorn.
So I wouldn't mind starting. So like I said, I work for DaVita. We are a healthcare company, and we provide at the core of our business dialysis to patients who have kidney failure. So basically, without you sort of really paying attention, your kidneys are working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to filter out your blood and to keep your fluid levels down and to remove any toxins. And so when they shut down, in order for you to continue to live, you have to either get a kidney transplant or go through dialysis, which is, for the most part, and most modalities, 3 days a week, 4 hours a time. So basically a part-time job on top of you just living. So what I do in my role is I oversee 13 facilities here in the Houston area. And in each of those facilities is a facility administrator or a manager of that facility. And then within that hierarchy, they have our nurses and our dialysis techs who are taking care of the patients day in and day out. So our work doesn't get to stop because of COVID. Our patients get COVID. We have to treat them. Our teammates get COVID. We have to find a way to replace them. So lots in the way of COVID response to talk about in terms of what we do here at DaVita.
I can jump in next. So after college, I started working in architecture and got into real estate development, and was really, I guess, inspired by this idea that there's a real relationship to communities of color, real estate, sort of business, investing, and this idea that that sort of creates a lot of opportunity for communities that don't look like us. And we typically fall prey to those through gentrification and different things like that. And so I started on this path of really looking at that relationship between real estate, investing, business ownership, things like that. I'd gone to business school out in California and sort of settled in Oakland. And I've been working in real estate development for the past, I don't know how many years, but through the process, I'm very aware of what gentrification is and what it looks like, how it starts, how it happens upon our communities, how we lose control, and all of those factors. And through the work that I do, my job, I run commercial development for this organization. And a part of that is developing a strategy that pairs real estate development with business investing. So when you create a new building, how do you invest in a Black or woman or minority owned business along with that to really occupy that building and anchor the community and provide jobs? So I've been doing that work for a while. And when COVID-19 hit, I had spent a lot of time going through, I worked in finance and banking a little bit, so really restructuring business models for a lot of our tenants to make sure that they wouldn't have to close. Their businesses wouldn't have to close after, after coronavirus, during the shutdown. And one thing that I was really aware of is that while I was doing a lot of work for my portfolio of companies that I work with and my properties, there's a larger issue both locally and regionally and nationally of minority-owned businesses not having the tools and the resources that I was providing to my own portfolio, and within the larger context of, people of color don't have access to capital and resources that they need. And so I started an organization in May that began raising money specifically for Black-owned businesses in Oakland that really helped them with grants and relief dollars so they wouldn't close during the coronavirus. And that expanded now into a venture capital fund that invests broadly into Black-owned businesses across the country. And one of the things that we're really responding to, and that's sort of conscious, is I am not a healthcare worker. I cannot save lives. I don't even know, if I get a cold, I'm out for several weeks. That's just not my lane. The one thing though that I do know is business investing in real estate. And I was really inspired by seeing what was happening out and around me to go and do something for it. And so my little role, my little niche area of expertise ended up becoming really useful for our city and what we needed to survive. And so I was really happy that we were able to put a team together and respond really quickly and create a movement that sort of supports a broader fight for racial and economic justice in our city.
Yeah, thanks. That's awesome. Lorena, you look like you're about to hop in next.
Yeah, if I can get off mute. been a problem ever since the pandemic. But so I work at Procter Gamble. Over the last 4 years, I've supported our feminine care businesses. So P&G is known for its portfolio of brands. No one really knows what P&G is. But I supported our Always, Tampax, and Always Discreet portfolio with our Walgreens customer here in Chicago. I think one thing that was very eye-opening as we kind of got into March was just how relevant these categories are to women's wellness, right? So we typically think about feminine care and incontinence as very commoditized categories. But as we saw with the pandemic and the sales spike that we saw, consumers were stocking up on the things that were essentials, right? And feminine care is an essential. Periods don't stop for pandemics. And so my role here on the Walgreens business is really making sure that we have a really strong pipeline over the next 2 to 3 years back with Walgreens on a portfolio that really makes sense, right? So feminine care, adult incontinence, both of them are very, very linked to health. But we don't really talk to consumers about that. We kind of say like, hey, you need it once a month, buy it, walk away with it. But we're not necessarily telling them exactly how we can help amplify their women's wellness routine. And so via our strategic partnership back with Walgreens and our innovation center back in Cincinnati, I manage the relationship between both Walgreens and the company.
Great. And this is Tanya. Speaking of pharmacies, I work for CVS Health. And yes, most of you know CVS as your local pharmacy, right? You probably can walk 10 minutes into your neighborhood without seeing one. But healthcare today has become much more than that. A couple of years ago, we acquired Aetna. And now we really have 3 core businesses under one roof. We have the health insurance side, the pharmacy benefit manager, which is the acronym for that is PBM, and we have the retail side. So with this, we think, right, as many in healthcare, that this will be the secret sauce to really transforming healthcare, meaning how do we improve access, quality, and outcomes in a place where people can be reached and touched with different kinds of programs and services. And just to give you a sense for the scale that we have, right? We have 10,000 locations. We have 1,000 minute clinics. Every day, give or take, we touch about 5 million people. Throughout the insurance side, we serve about 40 million customers. So we have a lot of reach and power in there. And with respect to COVID, we've been doing a number of things. On the pharmacy side, when people had to go in and shelter and lock in place, we helped elderly people, particularly those that were taking what we call maintenance drugs, make sure that they could get their extended supply, right? So they didn't have to be running to the pharmacy and getting exposed. Once we got them set, that was great. But then we pivoted then to making sure we were rolling out a testing strategy. And so we started implementing those within the minute clinics. And today we are expanding that strategy, but geared towards other employers and the universities and other people that need to have mass testing capacity in order for operations to or functions to return quote unquote back to normal. So we're doing that. Behind the scenes too, we play a key role in the pharmaceutical supply chain. So as many of you know, COVID started in China and then it hit Eastern Europe, where a lot of the key ingredients for pharmaceutical products are generated. So we were working behind the scenes with government entities and pharmaceutical companies to make sure that key ingredients for critical drugs was secure, right? That there was not going to be a disruption on the supply chain. Similarly, too, when a lot of treatments were being tried out at the hospitals, right, to save patients' lives, and being tried in ways in which they were never used before, we were looking to make sure that the supply of those drugs was steady, right? That the patients that needed it first for other conditions were able to get those. So we're doing that. And then last but not least, today we're looking to pivot into virtual care. We know that the world is not, quote unquote, going to be the same. We're not going back to the old way of doing things. So can we create new ways and channels, right, in which we can serve patients? So maybe instead of going into the minute clinic as we did before, right, to get a physical or something, or talk to a professional, now we're creating ways in which that can easily be done, just like we're doing here today, right, through a virtual call. And looking ahead too, we're going to be playing a key role in the vaccination process. So when the vaccines come out, the CVS locations and minute clinics are going to be a key aspect where we're going to be deploying that. With respect to my role, one of the key things that I've been playing a role in has been with the testing strategy. We know that probably healthcare access is not equal in all the places where it needs to be. So for example, when they were figuring out where do we roll out these capabilities, right? I was able to provide input and say in a city like Chicago, when I saw the list, I noticed that, certain zip codes that were being heavily affected by COVID, we were putting limited testing capacity there. So this is why, again, these companies need to have diversity and people that, bring in different thinking, because I was able to raise my hand and say, no, hey guys, we're not looking, in the right place to put these testing capabilities. So a lot more analysis was undertaken to make sure that we were looking at where the hot spots were for COVID are, and that we're putting in the right capabilities in those locations. So that's a little bit about CVS, what we do, and how we played a role in the pandemic.
Great. Thank you all. I think where we're going to go next is talking about maybe this intersection of your education. So what have you kind of learned throughout your career in the place where you are now, and reflecting on how have the skills you've developed or the knowledge you've gained helped you to kind of work or pursue excellence in this time. So I don't know who wants to start there, or you can also think about it in terms of,
Tanya.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe I can get us started. I think I've learned a lot of great things both when I went to college and in graduate school. But the one thing that I would wish I would have learned early on in my career, right, was this power of cultivating relationships. And I alluded to it early on. Now more than ever, right, the pandemic has shown that we cannot go at it alone. And that implies the same for personal and professional growth. All along the way, especially as people and women of color, we need the support. We need to always be out there reaching out and cultivating our networks. And not only for, to see if someone's going to be able to, open up a door of opportunity later down the road. But I've been able to count on so many people, right, to give you advice, to just let you know what you don't know. And that has been incredibly enriching. So there are so many ways to do that. I think in the beginning of my career, I was very focused on making sure I did my job, I did it right. But pretty soon it became apparent that it's much more than that, right? And that relationships are key. So I would say that has been one of the key learnings for me, being and I wish I would have known it when I was, probably as our audience is a little younger, that relationships are everything. And be mindful, right, to spend some time of your working time making sure that you're nurturing, reaching out to new people, being exposed to contacts in other places and organizations that you're interested in. So that's one of my takes.
I think I would like to follow up on that, something similar. I think I graduated, or I entered the workforce, I guess, in 2007, 2008. I was really worried that I was going to be a job at all. And one of, when I don't know how old you guys are for that. And so one of my thinking is like, my degree is practical, like, it's an architecture degree, you can go out, it can be an architect. And I think one of the lessons that I've learned since then, is that while coming out of, you're going to pivot so many times throughout your career. And I promise you, I haven't picked up a pen and drawn anything in 10 years. The changes, but that skill set I learned in architecture school, just something that I was passionate about around visualizing problems and dealing with big teams of people and leading big groups. Those are the type of skills that you take throughout your career. And so a lot of what you learn in school is not the technical sort of things, the design programs and things that I learned in 2005, like those are useless now. but the broader skill sets do remain. And so I think it's great when I like to tell people, if you're curious about something, you should pursue that and understand that over the course of your career is going to change many, many times. Like if you told me when I was, 17 going into college that, in 10 years I was going to be an investment banker on Wall Street, I would laughed at you, but I did it. And if I hadn't done it, I wouldn't have been able to do where I am today. So those skill sets and things that you learn from school, sort of the teamwork, the leadership, those things that are really hard to find, actually ended up being the things that I carried with me most throughout my career, rather than the technical skills, I would say, in some ways.
I think that's a great point. I mean, I think a lot of times we're encouraged to kind of find a field and become an expert, whether it's in a technical capacity like accounting, finance, or something like that. And I remember when I first started, I was like, I gotta pick a degree that's like gonna be effective for me to find a job right after school. And so I took like an accounting class, did terribly, and I was like, I can't do accounting. So instead, I just changed my mindset to say, if I'm curious about it, let me look at it, right? So I took a couple of public health classes, I took a couple of international relations classes, business classes, and that really piqued my interest in the area of business development. But without having had the kind of that mindset of curiosity, but then also not feeling necessarily that pressure to say, okay, like I have to do it this way, or this is the only right way. I think that really enabled me to find different interests and different passions that, to Tanya's earlier point, you start to be able to integrate a point of view when you start working. That's unique, and that's unique to a lot of your coworkers that you might have in the future. So I think being curious is 100% like the way to go in college. And then as you start thinking about career paths, I think I would leave you with like 2 cents of advice is, and for me, this is still resonates true. I would always try to focus on like, how can I make every single thing that I put my name on perfect? But I think the pandemic showed us that we really got to start pivoting and being resilient in a way where you start to focus more on the progress you're making versus perfection. So make sure to kind of give your guys yourself some grace, even as you go through school, and focus on the progress you're making versus like aiming for perfection every single time.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I'd add to that, and at least sort of alluded to it, was just the skills or the perspective or the thought processes that you gain by the major that you have or the classes that you take is going to be way more valuable than specifically like what you're learning in that class at that point in time. Like I said, I mentioned that I was a dance major, and when I got to work, I'd actually gotten the feedback that like, hey, you're actually able to take feedback and change it really quickly, not realizing that my training as a dancer and having to do that, which seemed just so routine to me, was a big thing in terms of how I showed up in the workplace. And so I would say, although it seems like a very sophisticated practice, is to really sit down and think about what clubs or sports or whatever you've been involved in, and what actual skills that's probably afforded you that you probably aren't even paying attention to because it seems so routine to you in terms of how you think about how you show up in the workplace or the next stage of your career.
Super important. I ran track throughout college, and if like that whole just being awake all night, running, working out, consistency, like that's kind of what you're learning in college. It's not, necessarily what's in the books. It's how you think, how you move, what you're, to Lorena's point around, resiliency, like how do you stick with something? How do you finish it? How do you go to practice when you're really tired? How do you, and like a lot of people, I went to practice and I had 2 jobs, it's like whatever you're doing and managing your lifestyle, those are the skill sets you learn in college. So exploring that and coming into the process open to the fact that it's going to be really, really hard. It's probably not going to look like in 4 years what you thought it was going to look like. And it's certainly not going to look in 20 years what you thought it was going to look like, is a part of that process to be, open to engage, that it will change, and you can sort of react and respond to that.
Can I just add another quick one on top of all of this? I would say, I'm going to keep it very simple. Just know that you are enough. I think when I came out of college, right, I went into banking. Again, not a lot of Latinas not a lot of people of color into banking. And there has been many times, and even today, right, when the imposter syndrome kicks in, when you don't think you should be there, when you question whether you're bringing enough value. But if you remember anything, just remember that you're enough. You are going through this journey. You live in this society. You have an opportunity to contribute, right? And you need to be heard. So I would say I wish someone would to have reminded me of that, because yeah, there can be times when you don't think you deserve to be there, when you feel out of place, when it can be lonely. And if someone would have reminded me more frequently of that, some people did, but if someone would have reminded me more frequently of that, I think I would have been better off.
Well, I definitely want to have us keep continuing with this discussion. For those of you on the line, feel free to drop questions in the Q&A box. I'll keep my eye on there for any attendee questions. But I do want to kind of like touch on what Tanya just said about kind of our imposter syndrome. And so for any of the panelists, would you want to take a stab at defining it for those of you who don't necessarily know what it is, but might recognize it as soon as we define it?
I mean, as a whole, or I'll define it as a whole, but what I will say is that it shows up differently for different people in different places and spaces. But the sort of general idea of imposter syndrome is when you are in a space where maybe you are one of one or one of few, and sort of the mental playback that goes in your head that maybe you don't necessarily belong there, or that there was some sort of door that was just left open that just somehow slipped through, or maybe it's, sort of projected on you via other people, sort of asking you questions. Just really the general idea is just you being in a space where you feel like you may or may not have the qualifications to be there. I think what's important, and at least for me, just speaking from the I, is I know that the main character in my imposter syndrome is my mental state, and I talk myself into believing that I don't belong there when no one probably has even said that or given any hint of it. I just decided to make it up in my head, and then my brain just starts running, and my heart's trying to chase back after it, like, get back in line, you belong here. I think the ways in which I have been able to sort of rewire myself is, number one, is to manage the self-talk, and to remind myself that I'm in the room, and yes, I am different, but that's why I'm here. It's because I have a different perspective, a different background, or a different pathway that got me here. And along the way, that diversity in thought or background has afforded me the opportunity to be able to be successful. I think the second is to be able to have sponsors or mentors around you that can help you navigate spaces when you are going to be the only one or few, and really using that person to talk to them and talk through, okay, I'm going into this new space, role play me on what that conversation would look like, or here are the things that I'm worried about in terms of what to say or what to do. So I would say those are the two things that I sort of really lean to. And it really shows up to me when I change jobs. So at least talked about transitioning. I've transitioned roles quite a bit just in terms of growing. And it's usually where those things show up, because you're not comfortable, you haven't seen it before. And if the role is bigger than you, you're probably like, why do I even have this job? I can't believe they afforded me all this stuff. And the reality of it is that people make pretty good decisions. You're probably there because you need to be there.
Yeah. I mean, to Adriana's point, I feel that way. I started my own company and I feel that way all the time. It's like no one hired me but me, and I still feel that way. So it's that idea that it's there, it's going to be in the room wherever you are. But learning to manage that internally is the most important part. It's not an external thing. It's really an internal thing.
Yeah, thank you. So I know I'm going to keep my eye on the Q&A box, but As we wrap up and reflecting on what's been going on kind of with COVID since the beginning of the year, maybe let's finish by sharing something that we've been proud of, something that either way that we've made an impact or been a leader in our communities. And I'll start with, I guess, Tanya, since I know she has to jump first.
Yeah, I think the work that is being done at CVS Health and being part of the decisions about how we're going to transform, how is it that we need to pivot into delivering healthcare has been a tremendous learning opportunity for me. If you had asked me a year ago what I was going to be working in, come in the summer and going into the fall, it would have never been this, right? But and so then to speak to the second part of your question, what am I proud of? The fact that situations like this continue to show us how flexible and resilient we can be, not only professionally but personally. I now have also a 4-year-old daughter, so being able to do my job and in a space that right now really requires my attention while balancing my family needs and that of this little person that is now part of my life, I feel like I've grown by a lot in the last 6 months. It's a great opportunity.
Thanks.
Yeah, I would say that as a company, I'm really proud of how we've pivoted a lot of our innovation pipeline that we had maybe like ready for 3-4 years from now to really addressing the needs of consumers today. So like launching Safeguard, a couple of Microban is another one. So brands that are actually making a difference in people's homes. But then I also think one thing that is parallel with what's happening from a pandemic standpoint is really all the racial injustice that's happening within the country. And this isn't new, but I think as we're stuck inside and, are glued to our phones, we can't look away. And so I'm really proud of the fact that a lot of my friends, a lot of people coming from MLP have taken the initiative to have those tough conversations at work and kind of bring what's happening outside of work inside the work, because it doesn't change the person, right? Like we are the same person we are at work and when we're not. So making sure that we're having those conversations in the midst of this pandemic, because communities of color are being disproportionately impacted by it. I think starting those conversations and then also coming up with plans of how we're going to address it, both inside the workplace and outside. I've been really proud to see that there's been a lot more open dialogue about that. And so I think it's a one positive thing that's come out of the pandemic.
Yeah, I'd say similarly, DaVita's response to, and we call it diversity and belonging. If you ever look up DaVita, we just have very unique names for everything, I guess. But just in the 11 years that I've been with the company, I have not seen so much agility around responding to the needs of our teammates, especially around racial injustice and wanting to have the conversations and wanting the tools to have the conversations. And then the second thing I would say is, like I said, our work doesn't stop because of the pandemic. Our techs are working 16-hour days with patients day in and day out. And I'm just really proud of an organization that found a way to respond and still treat our patients that have COVID in cohorted settings while still giving the treatment that they need to our patients who haven't yet and hopefully will not be affected health-wise by the pandemic.
I guess I'm the last person. I would say, I think what I'm most proud of about is, I think, unfortunately, depending on how it looks, is you kind of grow and you graduate school and you go into the workplace. Oftentimes, and a little bit to Lorraine's point, you go into work situations and you kind of have a day job, and maybe it's nice and you like it and you're somewhat passionate about it. It's not your favorite thing. You don't kind of live and die by what you do from 9 to 5. And then you have sort of a separate life, and it can be very different, particularly if you come from a community of color where you work in corporate America, and there's just a bifurcation between those two things. I think I'm very proud of what I've seen from, myself and my peers and people who have sort of, blended those things, successfully blended those things, and said, you know what, I'm going to use what I have in terms of this corporate job or this access to resources or whatever it is, and I'm going to make sure that my community benefits or has access to it in whatever way. And I think that's the impetus for the fund that I started. But I have friends and people that I know all over the country who worked in sort of, everything from finance to CPG to, lawyers, and people just as individuals taking the incentive to say, okay, this is the thing that I do. Let me make sure I can get this out to my community, even if it's just me sharing it to my 5 friends. And there's been so much momentum created by that. I think that speaks to the value of sort of networks like MLT. One of my, co-fellows, I don't know, he was in my class, and he was MLT in undergrad and graduate school, organized hundreds of people across the country that were MBA grads to sort of tap in and do similar work. And so there's tons of examples of that all across the country of people doing that work. And I think it's great. And I think that even if you're just going into college or just before college or after, or wherever you are in your career, there's really opportunities for that. And I'm really proud of all the people that have done that. And I hope that, everyone feels inspired to do something, to make a difference.
Yeah, thank you so much. Now I'm gonna, if there are no questions from attendees, I'm gonna pass it over to Kayla to help close us out. Or certainly, Kayla, if you have any questions for the panel, definitely let us know.
No problem. Can you guys see me?
Yes.
Okay. I can't see myself, but I'm going to put a survey in the chat box for everyone if you can take some time to fill out that survey. And then I'm also going to launch our second poll so we can get a little bit of feedback on how the workshop went. Thank you so much to our panelists for speaking today. And if you want, I can open up the chat and you all can say thank you as well. Let's see. Thank you all for attending today as well.
Yeah, and I'd also like to say thank you to all the MLT panelists. It's great to know that you're all rising leaders in the MLT community, and hopefully, as we grow in the Bay Area and across the country, I know, yeah, we'll be able to kind of expand our impact.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Before you go, please remember to take the survey and please complete the poll. We have about 25% complete. Okay. If no one else has any questions, we can go ahead and end the webinar.
Okay.
Thank you all again so much for
Thank you for
participating.
having us. Yeah.
No problem.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.